All right, guys, let's tie up what you're on. Finish that up before we start anything new. All right, how are those logos coming along? Anything you need help with? Anything you'd like me to go over? All good so far. All right, cool. So just to more or less give you guys an idea of your next set of logos. Now remember, these are all on the Learn portal for you to access in your Illustrator exercises, but these will be printed out and given to you guys. I'm just showing you the digital copy. So you've got a second batch of logos, and then you'll have one final exercise, possibly next week. Similar to how InDesign had Mexico as a last exercise, Illustrator, you will also have a final exercise as well, and that's going to be a poster layout. It is on Learn for you to have a look at if you want to kind of see what that's going to look at before I give it to you guys. But let's just have a look at the second batch of logos. Now, the second batch, there is maybe just one or two repeats, in which case you don't have to do those again. But there's also a lot of new logos as well. So I think the algae and the bike might be the actual repeating part, or just the algae logo itself. All right. But as far as your next batch goes, as you can see, they're going to be a little bit more detailed in terms of what you are creating. Right now, you've only had maybe single shapes, duplicate shapes, but moving forward, eventually when we get to 3D, you'll be working with patterns. We've already discussed pattern making as well. We've looked at elements like dashes and outlines and so on. And we've also looked at the scissors tool. So I've already given you guys the algae logo for you to create. The rest of it, you guys are going to try, of course, in your own time. But as usual, if you want me to demonstrate something and you're unsure, I will go over any of these with you guys in class. Of course, there are still topics and features still to cover, like turning elements into 3D, where to get your effects and apply elements like drop shadows and so on. But most of this, you guys can start building in bits and pieces, because gradients are here, Pathfinder is here as well. The only thing I'm going to start off with today is just building part of the Pepsi logo. So today we are going to look at a little bit of text as well, but because you guys come from InDesign, you're going to get a hang of the text a lot easier compared to InDesign. It's all very similar. So parts of this Pepsi logo, anything difficult here? Anything you might get stuck on? The wave part in that Pepsi logo, and getting rid of that essentially. So if you're looking at it, you can identify your basic shapes. You've got circles there, you've got rectangles, but then as Thomas said, we've got this wave in the center. Now, how would we go about creating that wave element in the center? Because remember, half of our logo is red and the other half is blue. So list of ideas on how you would go about achieving that. The eraser tool. So that is the correct answer. Now you guys might go and custom draw that. You might try and split your shapes up in different ways to get that wavy option. You might draw the wave line itself and make that white and look as if it's been cut up. However, you're going to need to make sure your top and bottom is, of course, accurate and the same size. So to answer or to demonstrate Shreya's answer, which was using the wave tool or the eraser tool to create that wave, eraser was part of the splitting options that we looked at. So we've seen the knife tool, we've seen the scissors icon when we looked at the planet logo as well, or when we were about to do the planet logo. But let's have a look at the eraser tool itself. So your eraser is grouped with your scissors tool. So usually your first default tool. I'm going to click on that once to activate it. You should all more or less see something similar with your cursor. a kind of target icon, but you should also have a circle that's around it. Now, that circle can change size. That is your area that it's going to remove, the amount of area it's going to remove. If you need to change that circle, make it larger, make it smaller for finer detail, you can use your square brackets on your keyboard. By tapping those, you are essentially making the eraser area larger or smaller. That's the amount of space it's going to go over. So square brackets next to the letter P, activating the eraser tool. This will either make that circle smaller or larger for finer detail. Now, depending on how large of an area I want to cut out, I'm going to make my eraser quite large. Now, when you are working with this, what I do suggest is to maybe keep your area around your logo fairly clean, because what can often happen if you've got other elements around it with your eraser icon, doesn't matter if it's not selected or if it is selected, the eraser tool can actually go and get rid of those pieces. So it's allowing for a little bit more of a detailed removal with your logo. So when you are using the eraser tool, I do suggest that you keep the area around your shape fairly empty. Partially because, like the scissors tool and the knife tool, I like to start a little bit outside the actual shape itself. Now, how it works is you set the large area that you want to cover with your square brackets. Then you don't have to have your shape selected because this will basically erase anything that it touches. Go to your starting point, and all it is, it's a click and it's a drag, like so. Click and drag straight through. Depending on how large that circle was, it's going to get rid of that entire chunk that it goes over. And when you use the eraser tool, so I'll do this one more time, click and drag across like so. When you use the eraser tool, it does not keep both of these as one shape or in a specific group. It splits them up into two separate pieces. So they can be created, they can be treated as two separate elements. They do not rely on each other to move around or to have colors. They are now two separate shapes entirely. So essentially, anytime you want to clean up perhaps your logos and there's like a little piece that's bothering you and your knife tool can't get rid of it or your scissors tool can't cut up the parts correctly, then I highly suggest the eraser tool because it goes over whatever it is you want to cut and it removes it completely. Okay. You're not needing to cut specific parts or anchor points with this. You just go over the entire shape and it's going to get rid of that specific piece. You can also almost in that sense make holes in shapes as well. You don't have to directly go through the entire thing, but if you click once, you can essentially make little cutouts, which you can then see through as well. So they don't have to be used in a sense to go through the entire shape and remove a chunk. You can work within it to create some empty spaces. Okay, so that is what I would suggest for your Pepsi logo, especially because it needs to be two separate colors, but they also need to be more or less the same size as well. So one more time, shape, eraser tool, like so. Use your square brackets to determine how much of a space you want to get rid of. Once you are happy with that amount and size, you take your brush. I also refer to it as a brush because you'll see that come about later on as well as Photoshop. But you take your tool, start outside of the shape, and then all you need to do is click and drag. And of course, you move your cursor in the wave that you want to create. it's going to automatically smooth out those edges as well. So even if your hand was a little bit shaky, it's not like the pencil tool where it's going to jot down every shake or sort of movement of the hand. It does aim to smooth it out in the end. Mm. All right, and that's more or less one of the pieces that I wanted to show you for your logo. Yes. Okay, so this particular feature is fairly new in the sense that it really only came out in the late 2024, 2025. But it's pretty cool when it comes to having elements kind of flow across a particular line or shape. So if you guys remember, type on path from InDesign, where we had text flow along a curved line or along a circle. Now, that's for text. For Illustrator, you have a similar function, but for objects instead. Did you manage to connect previously? Yeah. I'm going to relaunch that. Let's try connecting again. Okay, everyone else managed to open up the file? How many? Was it? Relaunch. Relaunch again. And then when that pops up, sign in again. All right. So if we wanted to take, so this is a Christmas card. It's way too early for Christmas, but pretty soon it's going to be Christmas with how fast the weeks are going. But this is a little Christmas card. And part of this design is I want to have these light bulbs next to my artboard. I actually want to have them kind of strung up on that line, like Christmas lights. Now, currently, how would I get that effect done? Individually place those light bulbs on that path. That means every single thing I'm going to have to move, rotate, and place, and then adjust them evenly. Now, this is obviously something that designers do quite a lot. They take a design and they want it to follow a certain line or path. Now, this is when Adobe said, if we have text on a path, text that can flow along a curved line or flow around a circle. Why not do something similar, but for graphics and objects, where I don't need to go and place every little piece individually and then worry about spacing and rotation. So that is referred to as object on a path. So type on path and object on a path. That particular tool is in your toolbar, and it's actually right next to your zoom tool. Now, this is not a graph. It looks like a little bit of a graph, but it's referred to as object on a path, and we should all have this feature. Now, here is how it works. You're going to need two things. One, a path for it to flow on, and two, the graphic that you wanted to put on. But you mustn't have one instance of the graphic. It's not going to make copies for you. It's not a repeating option like radial or grid repeat. All it does is it takes an existing graphic and it plonks it onto the path in that particular order. So typically, you would need to have duplicates already of the artwork or the graphic that you want to put on that. So I've set that up for you on the end of the artboard because Illustrator will move this. So it doesn't matter where they're sitting, as long as they're organized and it's easy for you to select. So these are all individual pieces. To start this off, you would want to select the path that you want to put this on, and you also want to select all of the graphic pieces that you want to place onto that path. So I'm going to make sure to select this black band at the top, as well as every light bulb that's on the end. Only those two sets, the path and the light bulbs. Your path doesn't have to be done with the line tool. You can use circles, you can use rectangles. It's for anything that has a path for it to interact with. So don't think it can only work with the line tool or an open shape. So I'm selecting both of these elements. Then I'll go onto the object on path tool. So we're not selecting the tree. Make sure you're only selecting the black band at the top and the light bulbs on the side. Then I'll click on object on a path. Visually, it's not going to work just yet because you need to then tell Illustrator from your selected pieces which one is the path. It unfortunately can't guess it. So this is why you need to have both selected so that it knows what it needs to go on. So I've selected all my light bulbs. I also had my band as something to select as well. When I click on object on a path, it then says click on the target path, which means I need to now go and select that band at the top. When I click on it, it's going to take all of your copies and automatically shift that onto the line. All right, so give that a try. Now, as you push that onto the line, it's going to take all, I think there were 9 copies. It's going to take all 9 copies and automatically place them on. However, it does place them based off the middle of the graphic itself. And you're on. All right, of course. So once that's plunked on, all of those 9 copies are going to be equally placed and distributed. And then you do have some settings that you can do here. Firstly, if we want this to now maybe rotate this to a different direction, you have a rotate icon underneath, which you can use to rotate all of those copies. By default, it is going based off the middle. Now, this is always going to keep them evenly spaced apart. So even if you try and move these around, all it does is it just swaps the order of them. You're not going to be able to adjust individual spacing, essentially. That goes based off the path itself. So I'm going to rotate them using the rotate icon underneath. And then what's the next thing I should do here? Take care of. I need to either move the path up or get the light bulbs to actually sit underneath the path where it should actually be. Now, this is not something that you do on the actual shape itself, but rather in your control bar, you have an area here, your reference point, which you have in InDesign as well. And right now, this is set to the middle of the shape. If I want this to set the point to the top, then I need to take this white square and click on the middle point and at the top instead. And that will shift the point at which this attaches by. So right now it's at the middle. I'm going to click on the top middle square to adjust that point of attachment. And that's going to give me a little bit more of a realistic look. All right, and then of course you do have spacing options as well, but that's only to determine the line length. Everything will still move with equal amounts of spacing in between. But that is something that's very similar to your type on a path, except now you can add pretty much any graphic that you want to a path. Just keeping in mind, depending on the graphic that you're working with, like this light bulb, if it's made of multiple little pieces, you want to group those together first and then place them onto the path itself. So two things, you need a path and then you need the amount of graphics that you want to copy across. So it doesn't make duplicates, it just takes what's existing and it places it on that path itself. Okay, so if you guys want to try this out with other shapes as well, I'll give you guys a chance to play around with this. This might be something that can help with a couple of your logos if you want a particular graphic going along a path. So let's try that out as well with basic shapes and see what designs you can get. Has it been loading for a long time?
Program just back.
Oh, okay. And that shouldn't be a problem. Do you have InDesign open as well? Okay, you might want to close InDesign. It might not have closed properly. Okay, so click on it first. Okay, now here we need to change the point that it attaches. So that's going to the top left. Try the middle one. No, that's the one you're on. The one that's at the top, but in the middle. Next to it. Yeah. So that's changing the side that it attaches based off of. Yeah. You just need to have it selected first. Okay. Yeah. This is, of course, a video. I see After Effects being used for something like this. Yeah. And then the mock-up for the bottle itself, when you guys get to Blender and dimensions, you'll be able to do realistic stuff like that. Yeah. Any questions about object on a path? All right, so again, like how text has type on path, now we have a very similar feature, but for shapes itself. So that's object on a path. All right, you need a path, and then you need the amount of copies that you would like to put on that path itself. Once it's been placed on, that is now its own little unique shape. So that does mean that if you want to edit any part of this, change the color of it, adjust part of the design, you are going to need to double click into this to then be able to access the individual pieces. So as you guys can see, isolating or double clicking becomes very important when you are working with elements that combine multiple shapes, like object on a path, compound path, clipping mask, and even grouping, so that I don't need to basically undo all of my work just to make one change and then go and place it back on this path. If you want to keep that effect in place, double click on the object itself, then you'd be able to access these on an individual basis and work on them, change their color, and so on. All right, then when I'm done in here, double click to come out of that. We will be looking at some interesting ways of making colors and also adjusting colors within a design and applying different themes as well. So that is something to look forward to. But for now, any questions on object on a path? I think everyone's managed to get it. If you guys are done, you can save up. And I'd like you to open up the file called, right, it's called Cat's Eye. Okay, Cat's Eye Detective Agency, not the music group, but the Illustrator file. All right. Now, if we think back to our prize document that we covered earlier on in the week, what was the method that we had used to select multiple or to select all of my yellow stars and group those together? We use select same. So what's the purpose of select same? What does that allow me to do? It allows me to, I'll start you off. It allows me to select an object, go into the select menu, same, and then choose based off what parts of that object must Illustrator then look for. Either full colors, outlines, and eventually you could also bring this into text. So let's say I chose full color, like we did. This now selected all of the yellow stars. Now that I've got all of those selected, what can I do with this? Why did I want to select all the yellow stars? I can group them. What else can I do? I can change the colors. I can change the appearance of it. So select same is good for selecting multiple elements that have similar properties, either to group them, as we said, or to also change the color of them. Now, this is not, or what it doesn't do is look based off of the shape. Meaning, if I did have a different shape in this design, let's say, and I'm just going to do this off the actual artboard itself, and I'm going to keep it the same color. If I had that shape somewhere else in my design, and I selected my star, select, same, full color, that still selects the circle. Just like how when you were grouping your red stars, you noticed that it was selecting the side of the box because it had the same full color. So select same is useful for mass selecting similar objects based off appearance settings and not the actual structure of the shape. Meaning this isn't only going to look at just stars that have yellow. It's going to look for everything that has that same shade. It's going to allow me to group those elements together, and it will also allow me to change the color of it. Add in a stroke style, for example, or setting. Those are the only elements or the only sort of properties that you'd be able to adjust using the select same. So it's quite useful when it comes to grouping and mass appearance changes. But now, what if I want to change the way the star is built? What if I want to change the actual structure of it, adjust anchor points, adjust paths, and have it update across the document? That is what we're going to look at next. With your cat's eye detective agency, this is what we would refer to as a bit of a branding document, where it's got a logo set up, it's got business cards planned out, and it's also got letterheads and envelopes, all designed in the same document. And what's on all of them is a logo, right? Very similar logo across all of the places within this document. Now, what if I want to change the logo? We come back later on and I decide I don't actually want these even pieces on the side. I don't want it to be so straight. I want it to actually look a little bit more like a cat's eye. I want it to have a bit of a curve. So what I would do, and I'm just going to activate something here. All right. What I would do is I'd go in with my direct selection tool and I'd make a change to my logo itself, the actual structure of it. Let's say I like this design more, but now there's an issue here. I have multiple other instances where that logo has been used that I now need to either go and change, or I need to copy and paste that new one and replace it in multiple areas, all within the same document. Now that is going to take up a bit of time, depending on how much you've got. So we're going to look at a method that's going to allow you, similar to select same, to select multiple graphics that are both the same, to then go and make a mass change in the structure of it. Allows you to edit anchors and paths. So select same, in this case, if I was to use select same for this, select same, full color. It's going to select everything that's black, but it's also going to select text, which is already not what I'm wanting. And what I can't do in this is adjust any anchor points. I can only work with one at a time if you're wanting to adjust the actual structure of your shape. So select same is only to be used if you are wanting to perhaps group elements and change color. But if you want to change the way it's actually built, you use something called a global edit. A global edit, which functions similar to select same, except it allows you to change the actual build of the shape itself and the way it looks across multiple pieces at once. So we're going to use our logo as one of those pieces. The first thing you want to do, of course, is select that element. Now, this is not going to be like select same, where I go based off a full color, because there are multiple elements that have full colors. Global elements or global edit looks at the exact shape itself, and it will look for everything that's built the same way, everything that's curved at the top but pointy at the edges. Unlike select same, where you could have stars and circles, but if those were the same color, it would select everything together. Global edit looks at the build of the shape itself, and that's how it finds and chooses. So you still start off by selecting your piece, and your global edit, you're going to find in the properties menu. So I'm going to select the eye, and I'm going to go into properties. then underneath all of my transform and appearance settings, you're going to find Start Global Edit. Okay, so Global Edit is to be found in the Properties panel. Now, we're not going to start this just yet. Let's click on the little arrow next to that to pop open the menu. And because Global Edit relies on the build of the shape, you get a lot less options for selection compared to Select Same, where it was going based off full color and stroke settings. Global Edits go based off appearance and size. Those are the only things you get to work with because it's looking at exactly how your shape is created. So I'm going to go based off appearance. Otherwise, if I choose size, I'm limiting the selection to only looking for the eye that's at that same size throughout the work. So I'm going based off appearance. Then I choose where should it look? Should it look at all the artboards or should it look at portrait or landscape? That is now very specific features. I'm going to keep this to all artboards. If you only want to adjust on a specific set, then you can swap that to range and you can type the number of the artboard that you wanted to look at. Because we want to do this across all instances, I'm going to leave this to select all artboards. So it's not going to look at just the page that it's on, but rather all areas. So I'm going to leave this at appearance, all artboards. We want this to include any objects that are perhaps in your pasteboard or your canvas. So pasteboard and canvas are the dark areas around it. That's what it's referring to. But these are what I'm going to leave my settings as. Once I'm happy with this, then I will click on Start Global Edit. When you click on that, you should see two things that happen. One, the main eye that you selected should get a red border. And two, every instance of the cat eye that it has found should have this blue sort of highlight over it. So if you zoom out and look throughout your document, you'll actually see that it's been able to pick up every instance of it, even places where it was mocked up on a pen. And that is because it was all built the same way. I'll show you what happens if something is not built the same way and an error message that you get. But now the red is what you edit. The blue is indicating what's going to update and what's part of that selection. So I'm not going to click off of this because then I'll stop the global edit. I need to make sure I'm still on the initial object. I'll grab my direct selection tool. And quick question, is anyone not seeing their anchor points on the corners when they grab their direct selection tool? Okay, quite a few. So if for whatever reason you aren't able to see the anchor points in your document, very quick setting, go up to the view menu and you're going to show edges. Yours is going to say show edges. Mine is already showing, so it's giving me the option to hide those instead. So view menu, show edges. Once you click on that, you should then be able to see the tiny anchor points on all four sides of the shape. We can then click on an anchor point, and these lines that stick out of it with the circle, that is a handle. You can click on any one of these handles on the circle itself to control the curve of the path that it is affecting. So when I make that change, I'm going to click on it once, and then I'm going to drag one of these handles up, like so. When you make a change, you should see that it updates every eye across the entire document. So even the smallest of changes is going to update across the entire document. Add it in again. You tried it.
Yeah.
You might just need to close Illustrator and open it up again. That's fine, it won't take too long. Okay, so that means we'll need to go and redo the Star Global edit. So when you deselect, now leave it like this. I'm going to show you guys what happens when it looks very similar. Because all right, so as you can see, when it comes to creating branded elements like this, which is something you guys will be doing very soon, you'll be digitizing your logos that you've created, and you'll eventually be making business stationery. That's what this is referred to as, a set of business cards, envelope designs, letterheads, packaging designs. You're going to have your logo in multiple places. Now, if you need to update that logo, you want to change a particular element of it, maybe pull out a stroke, make it thinner, adjust the way a particular element curves, you're going to have to do that however many times it was used. But through Global Edit, it saves you the time of individually adjusting it or creating every copy, because any change that I make to this, even if I was to maybe pull out a side a bit more, it's going to update across the entire document in every instance. So that is what it is doing. And this is something Select Same doesn't allow you to do. It doesn't allow you to change the actual anchor points and the way the shape is built. And it also relies heavily on exactly what you are selecting. So if you are selecting something where there's only one instance of it, which I'll show you guys in a moment, it's not going to select anything else on the design, because this was going exactly based off the structure so that it knew what to update and what to change as well. Andrew, you had a question. Okay, so the question was there, why was the lightning bolt at a 45 degree compared to the rest? So let's take a look at that. Let's talk about some common issues that you guys encountered and that you may encounter as well. Because the Global Edit relies heavily on exactly how something is built, down to the color, the outline, and even the structure, something as small as an extra outline that you may not notice, or an extra rotation or size, can affect what it selects. So for example, if I select this lightning bolt, you would assume that because it's used multiple times throughout the design, that when I go into Start Global Edit, by the way, my settings are still the same here. When I go into Start Global Edit, you would assume that it would select all those lightning bolts because it's built the same way. But you're going to get an issue where it says can't find similar objects, adjust the filters. Filters doesn't necessarily mean drop shadows and glosses and so on. It can also mean appearance settings like fill and outline colors. So when Illustrator can't find anything that's similar, this is the issue that you are going to get, which is what some of you may have faced. Now let's identify what's the issue here. Firstly, I'm going to say, okay, firstly, the angle is different, right? This is at a 45, whereas the rest are going straight down. So I can go and adjust that, like so. Maybe if I want to be a little bit more precise, I can just go into my properties, set that to 0, and that's now in position. So it looks the same. I'm going to try the global edit again. Still nothing. So it's the same direction, looks the same, but there's something on that shape that is not the same as the rest of the instances. Jaden? There is an outline that's on this that isn't on the others. So if I select this lightning bolt, there is a very thin black stroke on this. If I look at the other lightning bolts, I'm just going to go to one that's random. There isn't an outline on this. So it doesn't matter if elements are grouped together. Global Edit will still find it, but something as small as an outline is changing the way the shape is built. So now I'll remove this outline. I'll take away the outline color. Now let me try the global edit again. So I took away the outline. That was the part that was different. Start global edit. What do you know? It's found it wherever it was being used. So global edit is very specific with what you are selecting. It looks at the way it's built, and it also looks at any appearances, whether you've got outlines to it, if you've got filters like drop shadows or effects, it's going to take all of that into consideration. Okay, now does that make sense to everybody? Where this would be used? This is to change the way the shape is physically built, the structure of it, to be able to adjust the anchor points and the paths. You can also use this feature to change colors. Right? You can also use this as a means to change colors as well. But where it differs is that it changes the bold of the shapes entirely. So a couple other things you would have noticed is that in the first logo itself, the lightning bolt and the eye are separate pieces. But in the rest of the document, the logo is actually grouped together. It doesn't matter if you've got elements grouped, the global edit will still select them on an individual basis. It doesn't ungroup anything. It still keeps them as a group. It's just basically going into that to select certain pieces. Okay, any questions about that? Now this is specifically for shapes. This won't work with text. It's not something that you can use to find a word and then change what the word says. This deals specifically with anchor points and parts of a shape. And that is what it is adjusting. So if you guys were wondering about text, it's not going to work in that sense. It may allow you to change color, but it will only look for text that's exactly the same as like cat's eye, for example. All right. All right. Once you guys are done, let's go ahead and close this up. You can give it a save as well. If you are saving it, just make sure you're saving a copy onto your server for reference. So this particular feature is going to become very handy for when you guys are creating your business stationery and you are tweaking your logos and wanting it to adjust in multiple places. I would highly suggest using Global Edit. All right. Now I'd like for you to create a new document. Right. A new document that is A4 in size. This is going to be at a portrait layout. Okay, A4 in size, portrait layout. Please don't forget about the units to change that to millimeters. I still see some of us forgetting to do that. And when you are creating your shapes and other elements, you're creating it in points. So please make sure your units are set to millimeters. Let's add in our bleed as well. And you can call this document sale poster. That's what you can call it. Or you can call it 50% off. So this is where we're going to look at a little bit of color creation, some text, as well as working with some imagery. Save to. So because we're pulling from the training server, all right. Okay, so I think you guys can all see that. All right. So we're going to be building a full layout that consists of gradients again, but we're going to be custom making our colors. So we are going to be looking at how custom colors can be made in Illustrator and just all of the extra settings that you get with swatches. We will be taking a look at text, so introducing ourselves to text and how that works in Illustrator. It's a little bit different in terms of text boxes compared to what you are used to in InDesign, but the formatting and the way it looks will all be very similar. We will also be taking a look at something referred to as an image trace. Now, if you look at these trees that I have here in my design, are we going to draw this? I'd make you guys draw this, if I'm being honest. Damn indeed, but no, we are not going to draw this. I'm going to show you guys how you can bring imagery into Illustrator and have the software convert it into graphics and shapes that you can edit and work with. So those are some of the topics and techniques that we are going to do or follow for this. So you'll have access to these images as part of your training folder. I just have that saved on my end, but I'll tell you when you guys can sort of bring those in as well. But we're going to be looking at a range of elements here, but let's start off with color creation. It is break, however, so go ahead and save this onto your servers. I don't want to start something and then stop halfway through. So let's go ahead and give this a save. We can then take our break, and when we come back, we shall start with creating our custom colors for this. So this you can call 50% off. Hey Jared, we are about to get started. If you could just go ahead and just give me a thumbs up or a reply in the chat just to let me know that you are here. All right, guys. So I came around and gave everybody a set of logos. Anybody didn't get a copy? Okay, cool. So everyone's got one. So the same sheet that I was showing you guys up on the projector, that's now been handed over to you guys. So you can now get started with those logo elements as well. Of course, there are some things left to show you guys with 3D related elements and effects, but you can already start building bits and pieces of it and then just adding to it as the week goes. So you'll have your logos, And then next week, we're going to give you your final sort of layout exercise that you'll complete in Illustrator. Okay, so before we went out to break, everybody created their new document, A4, with 5mm bleed, and we all saved that. Now, what we'll look at here, I've already explained to you guys what it is we are going to be looking at and what we are doing. There is also a little logo at the bottom of this that has a very interesting sort of adjusted and treated piece of text. So there's quite a bit that we're going to be exploring when it comes to the text side of things. But the first thing we're going to do is create our colors that we need to now have within this design. So if we remember back from InDesign, how do we create colors? Okay, we go to the swatches panel and we click the little plus sign. What is another method that we could use to make color? Okay, you also have the color panel itself. So either or, both of it would bring you to more or less the same area. But if you also go through the swatches panel and click on the plus sign, you are going to get given your swatch settings, where you will be able to name your swatch as well as change the colors and the CMYK values for that. So whichever method you want to use, either via the color panel or via the swatches, clicking on the plus sign, I'm going to go through the swatches panel for this because there's some pieces in here that I'm going to touch on that wasn't available in InDesign. So if we can go through the swatches panel, and let's click on that plus sign at the bottom of our screen. You've got your usual settings, your swatch name, and then you've got your color type. Can anyone remember the difference between a process color and a spot color? What is a process color? Okay, it goes through layers of colors, all right, where it goes with one shade at a time, okay? Okay, spot colors are often pre-made colors that are made by companies like Pantone. All right, so both accurate answers. Let's kind of clean those up a bit. Process colors are colors that when sent to the printer, they are able to be mixed using CMYK. Maybe remember what CMYK stands for? What does it stand for? Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And that is the color of the ink that goes in the machine. So as Shreya mentioned, when something gets sent out for print, especially on the big production printers, and this is something you will learn more about when you get to your repro section, your printing section. Your pinks and purples and greens that you're making, they don't just get immediately put down on the page as that specific shade. They go through what is called a process, where a layer of cyan goes down first, then magenta, then yellow, and then black. And when those get put together, they actually fit almost like puzzle pieces. And when looked at from afar, give you the custom colors that you've made. So that is what a process color is referred to as, a color that any printer can mix using their basic CMYK colors. Then you have your spot colors. Now your spot colors can be used to indicate special pre-made colors, and we had quite a lengthy discussion about this on Pantone, where depending on the shade that you are using and you are choosing, you mix it as close as possible to what you are seeing, but the name becomes very important. If you are using something like a Pantone red, for example, we can't just call it red. We have to give it the exact code of the red that I'm looking for. For example, Pantone 485C. Now I know that that is a particular shade of red. Might not be exactly that shade, but I'm mixing it as close as possible so I can get an idea of what it looks like in my design. But when that gets sent for print, if I want my printer to know that a spot color was used in that particular area, not only do I need to give it the correct name, but I also need to indicate that it's a spot color. It's something that needs to be pre-mixed and printed on separately. They mustn't try and work out the CMYK values to get that, because I'm looking for the exact shade of Pantone red that I used in my brand or I saw in my books. So that is how your spot colors work. They change the way the color is identified. So it won't show up as a CMYK, but rather a solid red or a solid green or sage green that you are using. And that's how the printer will know that that's a separate color to use. So spot colors can indicate Pantone colors that brands use. And later on, when we get into packaging design, spot colors can also be used as a means to identify what we call a special finish. Special finish in the sense that if I'm designing a magazine spread or even a poster, and there's a particular element in my design that needs to have a gold sort of foil effect, like this, for example, like this magazine that has gold foils, not a gold ink, it's a gold foil because it's shiny, it's glossy. Now, when the printer needs to know that it needs to have a foil that has to be stamped onto it, I need to tell them that that piece of text needs to have gold or silver foil. You use a spot color to indicate that, where I give it a color and I name it gold foil. So when that printer goes and checks my file, they will know that they need to, after printing my design, go and kind of heat press gold foil into these particular letters. The spot colors are for consistent brand colors like Pantone, but they can also be used to indicate what's referred to as a special finish, like a gloss effect, a gold foil effect, I mentioned gloss. You can have silver foil, and even elements where I'm sure you guys have, if you run your hands over chip boxes or biscuit boxes like Baker's, you'll see parts of your text are actually raised. They have that little emboss. Spot colors are also used to indicate and identify that in the design. Now, those are aspects that you'll learn about when you get to the packaging side of things, but that is what spot color is for. Pantones and special finishes. That's what that's referred to as. Okay, any questions about that? All right. So right now, we're going to leave our colors as process, but I wanted to recap the difference between these two elements. And the first color we're going to create is going to be our shades of blue. So I'm going to go with a dark blue first. And your values are as follows. Anytime you provide somebody with CMYK breakdowns and percentages, you must make sure that you're providing the percentage in the CMYK order. If you swap those values around, you're going to get a very different color than what you mixed in the software. So your dark blue shades, we're going to go 100 for the cyan, 20 for the magenta, 30 for the yellow, and 0 for the black. Okay, that's going to see you getting almost your darkish blue color. Now, we're not going super dark, but that's going to be our dark color. Now, again, if you swap any of these values around accidentally, you, of course, are going to get a very different color scheme entirely. So when you are laying out CMYK values or you're providing CMYK values to somebody, make sure you're giving it to them in that particular order. So I've given this a name. I'm setting this to a process color. And color mode, if you created your document correctly as print, this should be set to CMYK. There's CMYK for printing purposes. Now, there is a setting in here that we didn't have in InDesign, which is this global button. We're going to leave that on And I'm going to show you what that actually does, what or how global sort of treats and changes the way your swatches are applied. But I'd like you guys to, after you've inputted these values, click OK to have that added into your swatches. And I want you to create your next color, which is your light blue. So this is your CMYK value for light blue. Okay, so 35 cyan, 5% magenta, 10% yellow, and 0 black, because we are not adding or making this darker. Once you have made that, you of course are going to change that name, keep that set to global, and then we're going to say, okay, in your swatches palette, you should have all of your document swatches, but towards the end, you should have both of your process colors that you just made. Okay, everyone done making those? All right. Now let's chat a little bit about what global means. Firstly, if you have a look in your swatches, you'll notice something different between your document swatches and the one that you made. What's different that's on that? The white triangles. The document swatches don't have that. Our pre-made colors don't have that. But the ones we made have that. Now, what is that indicating? When you are mixing a color, and I'm just going to mix a shade at random. When I'm mixing a color and I turn off global, I'm going to say, okay, I don't get the white triangle. So any swatch that has the white triangle on the bottom right means it is a global color. That's how you are, or that's how it is indicating. So what is a global color and how does that work? Global colors ensure something called consistency. So if I'm designing something on my artboard, I'm just going to create a random amount of shapes here. All different types. And currently, I have my non-global color created. So I have 3 different shapes, separate, and they all have this custom color that I've created. If I now go and edit this custom color by double-clicking on it and changing the color itself, does it change where it was used? No. It changes it in the swatches panel. But where it was used on the document, be it a piece of text or any particular graphic element, that is still the same. If that color was a global color instead, so I'm going to apply one of the global colors that we created. If I apply a global color and I go to update that, notice how it's changing all across. So no matter where a global swatch is used, when you go and update that color, it's going to update where it was being used. Whether it's a piece of text or it's any tiny graphic element that's with or on different artboards, that's grouped into different designs, whatever was using dark blue has now turned into kind of like the Shrek green, for example. So that is what a global color indicates. It's a color that can be applied to any graphic element or piece of text, but when you edit it, it will update wherever it was used. A non-global color, if that is applied, you can still go and update it by double-clicking on it, except this time, it's not going to change where it was used. The swatch itself will change, but any instance of where this green was used, it's not going to update for me. I will then need to go and apply or reapply that color. Question. To what it was updated to. So the question is here, if I save the document and I come back tomorrow and I update a color, will it re-upload and change? If it's a non-global color, no, it's not going to automatically update any instance of where it was used. If it's a global color, then yes, it will change throughout the entire file. Right. Any questions about that? Okay. Now you may think that if I upload a non-global color, if I add it to the shapes and I go to edit it and I turn on global. Okay, we may think that by turning this on, I've now swapped it over to a global color. We could assume that when I update this, now that it's global, that it's going to change. It is still not going to talk to these shapes. Why? Because they had a separate color that was applied previously. So you cannot go, or you can go and take a non-global swatch and turn it into a global color. However, it will not automatically update the ones that it was previously applied to. You would have to go back and reapply it so that the next time I try to change that, I'm going to deselect. Now that it is global, it will update. So you can turn a non-global swatch into a global color, but you'll just need to reapply it once more. And thereafter, when you make a change, it will update. Okay, so try that out. Make a couple of shapes, apply or recreate another global color, and then change that and see how that updates. Because this is yet again similar to global edits when it came to mass adjusting logos and how they were built. When it comes to branding and deciding on your brand colors, you are of course going to use those brand colors throughout most of your stationery. Now, what happens if you don't like that pink or that green that you chose? If you made it into a global color first, it's going to be a lot easier to update it from the swatches and have it change across all of your designs within the document. So this is not going to look at a different document. It's whatever is in this in Illustrator file. So for consistency as well. So as a habit, when I am creating any custom colors that I need, I always just turn on global. That's my habit. Because I know that I might want to change that. I don't want to risk having to go and change it 5 or 6 times throughout the design. Okay, so white triangles means it is a global color. Another little icon that you might see is a black dot that's in that. That black dot is indicating if a swatch is a spot color. So a white triangle is a global color. A black dot is a spot color. Black dot with white triangle is a spot color. And those are the types of icons that you would see in your swatches. So good to know this for when you're creating your own custom colors. And also when you guys go out into industry and you are working with other people's Illustrator files, you'll be able to identify if their colors were global, if they were spot colors, and you'd know essentially how to work with those. All right, all good with that? Custom colors and so on. Okay. Now we've got a lot of colors in here, some of which we don't need. We only need our 2 custom blues that we made. And of course, we're going to keep the black and the white. So proper practice, when you are designing, this can be done after you have completed your design, is to manage your swatches, to have only what you need inside. So if I want to get rid of all of these document colors, because I'm not going to need that for my design. My design is based off the 2 blues and black and white. To manage your swatches, in the swatches panel, we'll click on the option menu at the top, the flyout menu, and we will choose select all unused. Now we're not doing this yet because when you select this, you'll see that your custom colors you created are also part of that selection. Now we don't want to delete that. So when we are done with our design, we will come back to our swatches panel and we will clean this up. So there is a little bit more that we will look at within this. Okay. But another note that might interest you is depending on the layout of your swatches panel, you do have the ability to swap between list view and grid view. List view will show you the names of your swatches as well. Okay, I typically work in grid view. All right, so now that you guys have got your custom colors within this, let us start by creating our background element. So I'm going to move the text off of this and all of these extra pieces as well. Okay, so let's start by creating our background, a gradient, and that's what we're going to use our custom colors for. So your background is making use of a gradient with your 2 custom blue shades. Got that catch-up session with me after you run. All be done. I'm going to kind of speed through this very fast so that we're all on the same page. Large rectangle over the entire artboard, even into the bleed. Go into your gradient panel. Apply your default black and white, making sure this is applying to the fill. That's going to give you your gradient. For this one in particular, we are not doing a radial, but a linear. At the bottom, I have my gradient bar with my black and white. I'm going to double click on those circles go into my swatches area to apply the colors that I need. So my light blue and my dark blue. And then I'm going to adjust the angle so that I have the dark blue sitting at the top, fading into the light. Or if you wanted to, you could do the opposite. So that is going to be my gradient background, and I'm going to leave it as so. Now with this background, because we're going to have a couple of other elements within this and working with this, what we can do is perhaps lock this so that we aren't able to select that later on. So I'm going to select this, object menu, lock, a selection. So I'm selecting my gradient background, object menu, lock, selection. How else could I go about locking this? Through the layers panel. So if I wanted to, I can go via the layers panel with the background selected. This is technically the only thing in my layers besides the color breakdown on the left or the right. And in the layer panel, I can find its individual piece next to the visibility icon in the empty space. I'll click once, and that's going to lock that. So that means for the duration that it's locked, you cannot move it, you cannot select it, and you cannot edit it unless you unlock that. So that's going to give us some room to work with a bunch of elements without moving that around. Okay, so that is our background. Now, the next thing we want to particularly do here is our trees. And this is technically how they're going to start. They're going to start off as plain black pieces, which we are then going to take and position into our design to create this nice sort of monochrome looking layout. Now, I already told you guys earlier that we're not drawing that, of course. We are going to be looking at a method called image trace. In order to trace something, you need to place your image into the document. So let's do a file place. And from your Illustrator lesson files, you are going to be looking for an image. It's not another file, but for an image. Just waiting for mine to pop up. Okay, training. Training Illustrator lesson files. And you're looking for one that's called pine trees. That is the image you are looking for. Okay, so you have pine trees, and I think you also might have another one just called trees, but pine trees is what we are using. Once that's selected, we're going to click place. That's going to load up in your cursor. Now, two things. When you are placing an image into Illustrator, you can either decide to click once. That will bring the entire image in at its actual size. So if your image is larger than your artboard, it's going to bring it in at that size, which means you are going to have to go and scale that down. Alternatively, if you don't click once, what you can do instead is click and drag to place that image in. So I'm looking at the screen just because my laptop has changed color. Okay, and instead click and drag. That's going to allow you to better control the size itself. Okay, now what we have brought in is an image. It's not a unique vector file. In fact, all it is a JPEG. And what do we know about Illustrator is we can't directly edit images. Now, we are not going to go around with our pencil tool and draw around this. We are going to get the software to pick up the shapes for us from this image and convert it into vectors that we can then change the color of, we can add gradients into, and treat it like a normal vector shape itself. This is referred to as a process called image trace. And I've got a couple of examples to show you guys. If you remember, initially, when we first started Illustrator, I showed you guys or gave you guys more or less an idea of what it is you were able to do in this, which was to be able to create fully vectorized artwork, either with artwork for people, patterns, packaging, and even logo elements. Being able to take sketched out drawings that you guys have done for your logos and bring it into Illustrator to have it try and convert that into shapes for you. This is referred to as the image trace option. So how it works, and I'm going to show you with two examples, one with a logo and one with a fully colorized image, very similar to our Iron Man one. You guys saw the trailer for Spider-Man?
Yeah.
I saw that came out yesterday. Was it looking good? Thoughts? We are all gonna watch it. Some might go to the cinemas, some might choose to pirate it. I probably will, but it's looking good. I kind of forgot it was coming out. I actually thought it was coming out next year instead. But Spider-Man, I think Supergirl is also coming out this year as well. In June. A lot of movies are coming out in June. Even Scary Movie 6. That's a lot. All right, so 3 cool movies to look forward to. But yeah, so that's why I'm using this, because this just sort of came out, and that's what I've been thinking about. But yeah, it's looking quite cool, so I'm excited to see what that movie is about as well. So it is looking good. All right, so with image trace, you have two instances or a couple of reasons why you might want to use it. One, to get the software, if you are looking for graphics that you want to use in your design, but you are only finding image versions of it. Image trace can help pull those graphics through as vectors that you can edit. Another reason is when you are creating logos for people. What if somebody comes to you one day, sends you an image of their logo and tells you, can we change the color of this? Can we rework the shape and the design? Now they've provided you an image. You can't directly work with images in Illustrator. So that's where the tracing feature comes in. Being able to take JPEGs and convert this into individual shapes that I can change colors from, change the design from. Or even if you're wanting to do stylized artwork, take your sketched out drawings, convert that into vectors to maybe change color schemes and so on. That is where image trace comes into play. So how it works is you first place your image into the actual document. It doesn't need to be on the artboard. It is preferable that you actually work with it off the artboard because you don't really know how many pieces it's going to give you. So I'm going to start off with the logo as it is quite simple. It's only got two colors here, black and a red, and then the white background. I select my image, and in the control bar, you're going to find an image trace button. I'll click on this once, so you guys can try this for your pine trees. I'll click on this once, and depending on the complexity of your image, this process can be quite fast, instantaneous, or it may take a couple of seconds for it to process. So as you can see with my logo element, it actually converted that quite fast. Whereas with the trees, I'm going to try it with this as well. It'll directly tell you that because the image is large, the process might be slower. It doesn't mean it can't do it. It just means that it's going to take a couple of seconds for it to progress through that feature. Okay, but like I said, the more complex the image is, the longer it tends to take. But once something has been traced, you still can't immediately work with it and edit it just yet, because there are some settings that you might want to try out and play around with depending on the type of image you're working with. So right now, when you trace, by default, you are working with the default preset. If you click on the drop-down menu, you get a range of different options and essentially processes of how it can break down the image. Now with the logo and your pine trees, that's very simple. It's only got 1 to 2 colors. But with something like this, that is highly colorful and detailed, I'm going to show you the image trace. This is what my default option would give me. So what it's looking at is it's trying to simplify the design. And of course, that's not the result that I'm wanting. So that does mean he looks a bit scary. He actually looks like Spider Noir, which is also coming out. So there's actually a lot of things coming out as well. That is what I'm also excited for. So this is not what I'm quite looking for. So that is when your presets come in. Each preset will change the way the detail is brought across. So you have your first 5 presets. High fidelity to 16 colors. High fidelity, show you an example, is going to aim to take every color and shade that it's found within this and give it back to you as separate individual shapes. So if I go into that detail, this is what it's giving me. So this is if I am looking for the exact result of that image. But in doing so, you are going to get a lot of shapes that it has created. So this is not me now taking the time to create every piece where I perhaps could have done it in less shapes. This is me asking the software to do the work for me. So high fidelity, I'm asking it to trace every single shadow, every single color, and give it back to me in detail that I can adjust. But in doing so, you're going to get a lot of shapes, meaning a lot of anchors and paths. So I'll show you how that looks in a minute. Let me copy this actually. Let that expand. Show you the difference. That is what it has created. Okay, and you can see every little bit and piece. So that is creating a very highly detailed version of it. You can use high fidelity and so on if you really want to maximize the amount of detail. But that does mean you're going to have a little bit of cleaning up to do. You have low fidelity, and then you also do have the ability to break it down into less colors. That does mean you're going to get less texture and detail in what the image has. But if I broke this down into 6 colors instead, I'm not going to have as many shapes and parts and designs. It's actually taken certain shades and it's grouped them into a solid red or a solid brown, for example. So you can actually see here on the side of his head, you don't actually see the full head. So different presets would work for different designs. I say high fidelity and 16 colors. This actually looks quite cool. High fidelity and 16 colors is good for when you have a multicolored design. And then you have other options like shades of gray, black and white, all the way to technical drawing. This works best with line art, things that you sketched out and outlined in pencil. This is going to aim to give it to you in the form of basic lines. And for something like the Spider-Man that has a lot of shadows and colors, it's going to give it to me either in the basic black and white version, or it may just give it to me in the form of lines without any detail and colors within it. So different preset options work for different images that you are using. And some of it will provide less detail than others. So it really depends when you are bringing your image in. The default might work well for you first try. But if you are finding that you're losing some detail in certain lines that you made, then I do suggest going into elements like 3 colors, for example. In terms of your pine trees, it did a pretty good job because it was a solid black against a solid white. There isn't shadows and gradients that it needs to worry about. But something like my logo, I am losing the color. it also does trace text as well. Okay, but when it's tracing text, do you think I will get that back in text that I can change the font of? No. If you are bringing text into this, it converts it into shapes for you. It's not going to be able to give it to you as editable text. And I also do suggest looking at the letters itself, because sometimes it might not come out as straight, depending on the preset that you are using. So for a more higher quality version, I might use low fidelity because I only have 2 colors in this. And that will give me a much more straight version of my letters and a cleaner version as well. All right. Any questions so far about image trace? Okay, so you pop your image in, click on image trace, see the result. If you don't like it, try out a preset. Right now, nothing is permanent, so you are able to go and swap that around. Now you do have a couple of other settings within this as well. One of them being a tracing result. This is showing you your image after it's been converted into shapes. If you want to see exactly what's been converted into shapes, you can click on that drop-down menu and show it to you with tracing results and outlines. When I convert that into outlines, I'll be able to see what shapes were created separately and what shapes it's decided to combine. So with outlines, you'd kind of be able to directly gauge what shapes you are getting and what you'll be able to edit. But those are some of your viewing options. Now, once you are done with your trace and you're happy with it, you now need to apply the setting, because currently it is still an image. That is where your expand option comes into play. Once you expand it, you cannot go back to image trace, because expanding it now converts it into objects and parts. So I'm going to commit to this by clicking on expand. And what it does is it keeps all your elements as a group. So it doesn't directly separate them. It keeps it as a group. So with my pine trees, I'm also going to expand that because I liked the result. And when something is in a group, you can choose to object ungroup this. That now means I can separate all those pieces. So what I would want to do here is maybe the change that I was given was to get rid of the word company and perhaps make this top ring part of my A logo the same shade of red as what's at the bottom. So somebody provided me the logo and they said, can we change or adjust the colors in this? Took it into Illustrator, image traced it so that it could give it back to me as vectors, which means I can now go and adjust and change the color of this to anything that I see fit or anything that I need to update it to. All right, same can be said for your trees. Once you have expanded that, let's object ungroup. We can get rid of that white background by deleting it. And then I can grab my black silhouette and anyone that you guys want to use. I can now start bringing that into my design and scaling it while also applying a gradient, because these are now vector shapes. They have anchors and they have paths to them. Okay, so expand your trees and now start bolding your background element. However you want that to look, if you want to mix and match the trees, that is up to you. All right, I'll leave that creativity to you guys. So again, once you hit expand, it still keeps all the elements in a group. Otherwise, you would have multiple pieces that are separate. So you are going to want to ungroup, and then you can go and just pull out your black shapes. You don't need to go and delete every white piece as they are separate. Because it's not a group. So deselect that. Click on something else. Now try and select a black tree and move it. So because this image had two very distinct colors, a solid black and a solid white, you have a pretty successful trace where you haven't lost any detail along those edges. But with more multicolored imagery, you will get instances where some of that might actually join together, or in some cases, it might combine certain areas where you'll have larger sections of solid colors. Okay, so by now we should all more or less be done building that background. So I've only just used 2 sets of my trees to build that. And the rest of those trees, you can either choose to delete them or just keep them off to the side if you want to then bring them back and use them a bit later on. But any questions about image trace? So later on when you guys are done, you are welcome to go online, find some images of logos, find some images of designs like pattern elements, bring them into the software and trace them. See how much detail you can get back as well. So that's going to be something that's quite useful to a lot of you, especially those of you who like to sketch and draw and you want to digitize that. So it's going to make the process of creating that entire thing a lot faster. You will, of course, in some cases need to just tweak and refine certain areas, but it's going to get the bulk of the trace and the artwork done for you. Okay. Keeping in mind, of course, that it does create anchors and paths for your shapes. So every little piece will have its own set of anchors and paths, and depending on the quality that you choose, you can end up with quite a few, right? And we know that if you have too many of those anchors and paths, things might just tend to load a little bit in terms of effects and adjustments that you might make. And it'll also make the printing side of things be a little bit of an issue. So we try to simplify how many shapes and parts that you create. Delete what you don't need. All right, so everyone's done with their background. I think we can move on to creating our piece of text. So this is going to be an introduction to the text, but like I said, a lot of it you guys are quite familiar with when coming through to InDesign. However, the way text boxes are created in Illustrator and the way they work is quite different. So I'd like for you to finish up what you're on, and I'm just going to demonstrate text. So I'm just creating a new artboard next to that in a basic size, and I'm just going to use this to demonstrate my text. Now, in InDesign, how many text tools did you have? How many type tools? Just two. Type tool and type on a path. Now, because Illustrator is so creative focused in terms of graphics, patterns, designs, customizing designs, customizing fonts, Illustrator, of course, has more text options that you can use. However, I'll only be showing you the type on path to start off with. So, or type tool actually, but there is your type on path as well that you are familiar with through InDesign. But our main tool here is the type tool. I'm going to go into my type. I'm going to activate that tool. And here's how text and text boxes work. In InDesign, to create a text box, you have to click and drag. Now in Illustrator, you have two different sets of text boxes, two types. InDesign, you just had one, and that single text box could hold a heading or it could hold paragraphs of text. But in Illustrator, you have two types of text boxes. The first one, when you grab your type tool and you click once on your artboard, not click and drag, but just click once. What's going to happen is it's automatically going to create a text box and it's going to fill it in with some placeholder text. Clicking once with the type tool creates what we refer to as point type text box. So when you grab your type tool and you click once, you create a text box that's called a point type text box. I will explain the difference between this and a regular text box, but clicking once gives you a single line that you can type in. If you take the same type tool and you click and drag instead, you are creating the size of your text box, but you're also filling that in with placeholder text. And instead of one line of text, you're going to get multiple. Now, I just need to adjust one of my settings here. You guys should have default settings on your end. So click and drag. That's going to give me a text box that has lines of text. This type of text box is referred to as area type. So when you click and drag, you create a text box that's called area type. When you click once, you create a text box that's called point type. I'd like for you guys to create one of each. Okay. So both of these are text boxes, right? They have text. You can click in them, you can type in them, you can highlight, and you can delete. However, the structure of the text box and the way it sort of works is different between a point type and an area type. If I was to go and adjust the size of my area type text box, what do you think is going to happen to the text inside? Okay, the box gets bigger, but the text stays the same size. So on my area type, with my selection tool, when I'm grabbing the bounding box of my text box, as I drag that around, my text box changes size, but the text itself remains that 12 points. The text is not getting bigger, the text box is getting bigger. Therefore, it's allowing for more room. You guys are very familiar with offset text, overset text, and what that means. So an area type text box allows for multiple lines of text, like articles and paragraphs. And when you are adjusting the size of it, it changes the size of the text box to allow for more room. That's for area type. Now try the same thing on a point type text box. What does that do that's different compared to area type? The text changes with the text box. So when I am dragging that, the text box is getting bigger, but the text inside is also scaling to size. Now what can happen here is I can distort my text. I can stretch it and make it look very squashed or very stretched. So when you are working with the point type text box, this is one of the things that you will need to hold out Shift for when you are scaling. So an area type, when you click and drag with your type tool, that allows for lines of text. A single click is mainly for single lines of text, like headlines, subheadings, single sentences. So that is the difference between your two text boxes. Okay. So in a point type text box that gives you only a single line, area type, when you are typing within this, and I'm just going to type in nonsense, when I'm typing within this and I reach the end of that text box, it is of course going to jump to a new line. But with a point type, because this is a single line text box, whatever you type in stays on one line. It is not automatically going to jump to a new line. So point type is best for single lines, headlines, subheadings, maybe a caption, whereas area type works, of course, best with paragraphs and lines of text. So when you are designing within your layout, you would need to, of course, identify first. Do I plan on making use of paragraph settings like indents, paragraph spacing, or do I really only need a single line of text? That will decide the text box that you can create. The biggest difference is that point type continues on one line, and when you try to change the size of the text box, the text moves with it. Whereas with area type, text stays the same, but the box becomes smaller, therefore giving you less space for your text or more space. That is the biggest difference between a point type text box and an area type. All right, any questions about those two? All right. So for our first piece of text, our 50% off, which type of text box are we using here? We're using a point for a single line. So I'll grab my type tool, and on my design, I'll click once, and I'll begin to type in my text. Now, similar to InDesign, when you are wanting to change any piece of this, like the color, the font, or even the size, you must click on your text with your type tool. You'll see your flashing cursors at the end. And when you drag your cursor across, you can highlight. Alternatively, if you double click in that text, you'll be able to highlight everything within the box. So I'll highlight my text. In my control bar, I can change the color of that text. So I'm changing that to white. I'm not adding any outline to this. For text, we need to avoid any outlines within the design. We should never be putting strokes and outlines on a piece of text, especially when you're in body copy. So I'm going to make that white. And then comes my settings. Of course, your screen is a bit larger than mine, so you might be seeing some text settings already at the top. But in my case, I am going to have to click on character or paragraph if I want to access certain settings. Now, paragraph is going to give you paragraph-specific settings, like bulleted points for a bullet list, indents, space before and after, and you also get a hyphenate. If I'm specifically looking for font and font settings, we know to go to character. Does this look too different from InDesign? No. You might have one or two extra elements within this, but it is largely the same. Your menu at the top is your drop-down menu for your fonts. You are able to type in this. You are able to filter through your different styles. And you are also able to discover more if you are looking for cloud fonts. Right, so your fonts is everything that's on your system, including your cloud fonts. If we go over to discover more, or it might say find more, you'll be able to access all of the Adobe Cloud fonts. Reminder on how to activate that. If there's one that you want to use, you must click on the little cloud icon for it to activate. Now in this case, for my 50% off, what type of font do you think we should use here? A bold sans serif. Now, or a serif because it's numbers. Now think about the purpose of this. We want to indicate that something is 50% off. So it needs to stand out. In that case, I would go for a bold font. A nice, large, bold font that is easy to read. It's not confusing with the numbers. And I could either choose to go with a sans serif for something that's a little bit more clean and blocky. And if you want, you could look for a bold version of a serif font if you are wanting to keep the little tails at the end of your number. Now, depending on the style you are looking for, I'm going to go into my filters. And from my filters, I will choose whether I want to look for a bold sans serif or serif font. Let's say I'm looking for a sans serif. And then I'll be able to use my extra filter options to decide on the thickness of that font. So I'm telling it, look for sans serif. And then I'm filtering it even more to look for ones that are heavy in weight. So a bit thicker and are a bit darker. So you can combine multiple filter options to then be more specific with the type of font you are looking for. Okay, so I'm going to go for something that's bold and kind of in your face. Now, of course, you guys might not have the same fonts as I do because I've got some cloud activated ones. So you are going to choose based off what you have on your end. So I am looking for one that's quite bold and thick and dark. When I click on it, that is then going to apply it to my piece of text. Okay, so it's quite clean, easy to read. There's nice amounts of spacing between the letters. Be careful you are not choosing a font that is squashing your letters together and making those a bit difficult to read. Depending on the font that you have chosen, of course, running through the rest of this panel, you have your second drop-down menu. This is only going to provide you alternative options to that font. So you'll see certain fonts in your font library will have little numbers next to them. And we saw this in InDesign as well. Some of them have 2, some of them have 4. I've seen as many as 12 and 19. And essentially what that is, I'm just going to add one at random. When you are applying a font that has 2 different styles to itself, the second drop-down menu will give you access to those separate styles. So for Acumen, for example, I have a bold and I have an ultra black. So that is what your second drop-down menu is going to do for you. I'm not going to use that font as I feel that is a little bit on the default side of things. So let's go back to the one that I was using before. Okay. Once you've filtered fonts and you've applied it, it is very important that you remember to clear this. When you clear your filter, it means that the next time you go to adjust a piece of text, it's not going to only show you that filtered sans serif. And you're not going to be confused as to why you aren't seeing the rest of your document fonts or your system fonts. So make sure we clear off those filters. Okay, past that, you've got your font size. Now 12 points is good for a body copy. Even less than 12, around 9 or maybe even 10, that's good for your body copy. Is that enough for a heading, a headline that stands out? No. So we need to make that larger. A little trick here for you guys. Instead of clicking on your up and down arrows however many times you need to get to a certain value, hold down Shift, and when you click on those up and down arrows, you can increase by 10 points each time. So I don't have to tap 10 times just to get to 20-point size. So if you hold down Shift and you click on either of those up and down arrows, you can decrease by 10 or increase size by 10. Now, of course, in this case, 30 is a little bit too small for me still. Now, because this is a headline, it is a much bolder and thicker font. It's much larger on the page as well, but I am not making this disproportionately large, where it's taking up all of the room at the top of my design, where it might eventually reach towards the end of my artboard. That's now way too big. When you are designing your headlines and even your body copy, you want to make sure that you've got enough space around the text. So because we don't have margin guides in here, we need to still visually account for that space. And remember, headings, you should always aim to have a nice healthy amount of space above that piece of text. So don't have it go too close to the top, which was something I was seeing happening in your magazine spreads. Your headings should know in any way, shape, or form, even if it's something as simple as a 50% off. That shouldn't be so close to the edge of my artboard. I'm going to bring this down so that I have more space above that. Might just make that another 10 points smaller. Okay. Now, as you're moving your text box around, remember to swap over to your selection tool and make use of your smart guides to help you align that in the center of the page. Now you do have your other formatting options, right? You have leading. What's leading used for? Space between lines of text. So when you are creating body copy or article space, just going to narrow down my column here. I'm also going to change this font. Couple other things to point out as well. Should your body copy all be in bold font or italics? No. So please remember not to have that style of font applied to your body copy. This should be kept to either a regular version of that font or even a thin. But as Jaden said, leading works with lines of text. So of course, your point type doesn't have lines. It is a single line. And this is to allow for more space between those lines of text in case it tends to look too squashed. It's not something that you always need to adjust, but that is the leading option. You then have your tracking and your kerning. Hey, your tracking and your kerning. You guys remember the difference between that? What does tracking and kerning do? Okay, so both of it deals with text spacing, but the difference between it is with my kerning, this is a space between two letters or more, pairs of letters. And this will not work if I have the entire word selected. You can see when I'm trying to work with it, it says it can't actually be done. So what I need to do, if I am using kerning, wherever my flashing cursor sits, whether it's after my first letter or after the first two, wherever that sits without my text highlighted, when I increase that kerning space, it's going to make a gap only after that letter or that set of letters. Your tracking option is the opposite. Yes, it does deal with the space between letters. However, it's meant for equal amounts of space. So this does require you to have the entire word selected so that when I increase that spacing, I'm going to get an equal amount in between every single letter. And that gives me a much more spaced out look. It looks a bit cleaner. And this works well for headlines. You see this in logos as well, like Avon and Mac. They would have spacing in between their letters. It just gives it a little bit more breathing room as well. Should this be used in body copy? No. You don't want to be adjusting any tracking or kerning in body copy. Because if you do, this is what your text is going to look like. You're not going to be able to differentiate the words, where they start, where they end. So that particular feature is not to be used in body copy. And then you guys are familiar with the rest of your options, your vertical and horizontal. Remember, these two should always stay 100%. If your text at any stage, either one of those values changes from 100%, that means you've distorted that text. So if you are stretching your text, you have distorted that. Check for those types of values when you're in body copy as well. You also don't want to have your vertical and horizontal spacing adjusted in body copy. Okay, and then you have your other elements here like your small caps, your underline, and your strike through. We are already pretty familiar with that when it comes through InDesign. The only thing that we didn't have in InDesign was a rotate option, character rotation. What this does, and I'm just going to create another piece of text here. Let me set my values down again. Oops. And let's just bring these closer together. All right. What character rotation does is, depending on the letter that you have selected, in that character setting, when you choose to rotate, you are physically in the text box, taking a letter and rotating it to a certain degree. So I can eventually, at some point, rotate that an entire different direction. So that is what the rotate option does. You need to have a letter or a pair of letters selected. When you rotate it, it turns it within the box. So now my letter L actually looks like it's about to fall asleep, so it's falling over. So that is what your character rotation is for. Okay, another example. Let's see. So you see here, one thing to note about Illustrator type is when you make a new text box, it tends to save the previous settings from what you did before. So my character rotation, even though this is a new text box, it's still affecting it. So I'm going to set that back to 0. Let's see, upside down. Take the word upside and let me rotate that a full degree, like so. So you can have visual play on words as well using character rotation. So you guys can try out those little elements, but what I'd like you to do to finish up your text, you've got your 50% off. We now want to add in our winter sale. We will come back to this little drop shadow effect at the bottom, but our winter sale. Now, why did I choose this type of font for winter sale and not the same bold, thick font as 50% off? It's okay, so correct. So it's more whimsical, and also because it's a little bit more elegant. When it comes to winter, you often associate it with thin, dainty things like snowflakes, more elegant. You see Christmas designs as well, would also use a similar font. The type of, what style of font is this? It's a script, like a handwritten script. It's cursive, but it's referred to as script. So when you guys are filtering through looking for a font, you'd want to look at script for this type of style. Okay. Remember, your alignment options can be found in your control bar as well. You must have your text highlighted so that you can swap between center alignment, right aligned, or left aligned. That's going to be able to take my text, and instead of my winter sale being directly underneath each other, I actually want the word sale to be in the middle underneath winter. So I'm going to set that to center align, like so. Okay, when you guys are choosing a font, make sure it is also readable as well. Even though we are using a script, elegant, and whimsical font, we still want that to be easy to read. So don't go with something that's overly twirls and curls and elements like that. Keep it quite simple. Okay. So once you guys are done getting your text in place, that is the bulk of our text done. What I'd like you to do as the last part of this design is to create the little logo element, because of course people need to know who is having this winter sale. So I've created here just a little company. They are called Pine Summit. We're going to be doing some branded elements for them, like layouts. We'll also do a business card for them as well. And Pine Summit specializes in, let's say, climbing gear, for example, winter climbing gear or outdoor hiking. And so what they are having is a winter sale on all of their gear. So we need to now create their logo and place it onto this design so that people know who is having the sale. What I would like you guys to do is create the little snow mountain logo itself. We're going to leave the text for now, as that does have a little bit of an effect on it to get that kind of dome style. But I'd like for you guys to create the logo element. Okay, to give you an idea, these are two separate shapes that I just brought close to each other to have that mountain effect. Can we do this? Okay, you only really need one feature for this. And what's that? How are we going to get your snow inside? Clipping mask, correct. Okay. So very quickly before the lesson ends, when you guys are creating your logo, I'll go through this the two ways that you might have done this. The one way, of course, was through a clipping mask, where you have your triangle, that's your base of your mountain, and then you have two circles that are going to make up the snow. Now we know how clipping masks work. The shape that the circle goes into is the triangle. So this actually has to be arranged to the front. Object arranged to the front. Then I would have selected all three of these elements, gone to the object menu, clipping mask, make. Now, if you did do this method, then you would have, of course, needed to double click into this to then access the triangle again, to then give it back the black inside color. So clipping mask is the correct method. You would, of course, have lost that color for your triangle and you'd need to go put it back inside. However, if you guys remembered the other method to creating clipping masks that we looked at previously, which was the draw inside option. If you were using draw inside, so swapping over to that method underneath your control bar with my triangle selected, then using that option didn't need you to go and directly choose create clipping mask. What you would be able to do is draw your circles and have them automatically place themselves into the shape without you needing to then go back and give it its color. So those were the two methods that I would suggest to you guys. Clipping mask or using the draw inside mode. All right. Now, if you guys are done with that, you can go ahead and save this up. Tomorrow, we'll come back and finish up the Pine Summit text with that distortion. I'm going to show you a recolor method for this design. If I want a spring design and autumn design, I, of course, need to change up the colors. And then we will look at a little bit of 3D creation as well. Okay, so we do have some really fun and creative things lined up for tomorrow. Right, so you guys can save up and I'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. If you are staying behind, you guys are welcome to continue to work in your seat. Okay, so you don't need to move to a different area. Please make sure we are saving this document onto the server.